So in the last lecture, we defined our JavaScript object, which should represent our form. Now I want to output that in my render method here. I want to create all these inputs dynamically. So I'll get rid of them in the render form here for now. And I now need to, first of all, turn my order form object here into some kind of array I can loop through. An array where we basically have JavaScript objects where this key is just one property, an identifier property, and then we also still have the other properties. Well, we can create such an array relatively simple here. There are always more than one method, of course. Here I'll create my form elements array, a constant, which is an empty array. And then I'll use a for in loop where I get the keys of my, now this state order form. And the key, therefore, are of course the property names of that object. So the keys are going to be name, street, zip code, and so on. And if we access order form for a given key, we get these values here on the right side, of course. So with that information, let's go down there and let's create, or let's push, I should say, a new object to the form elements array. This object should have an ID, which is the key, because again, that is name and so on. These are the identifiers. And then it should have the config, which is this state order form for a given key. So this is now the right side of this property. So this JavaScript object, that is what we'll store in this config property. And of course, you can name the config property whatever you want. You can name it setup, whatever you want. So now we got an array of JavaScript objects. With that array, we can work. I can work with it by now creating my form here by looping through all these elements. So I will add curly braces here in the form. And now I want to loop through my form elements array with the map method, of course, to generate a new array basically. Here, this will get the individual form element, and it should return some JSX here. The JSX it returns, of course, should be my custom input component. And now we can configure this. It should have the elements, the element type. Now the element type can be accessed on the form element in my array. And there I said that in this config property, we would store the right side of our setup, so this object. So in the config property, this is just another JavaScript object, there should be the element type property and element config and value. And these are the properties I want to pass on. So in the end, what I pass on here is form element, config, and then there, as I just said, the element type. So just the name we have here, element type. We pass element config and value in the same way. So here we passed the element type. Now the element config is passed, as I just said, in the same way with form element, config, element config. And the value also is passed like this. Form element, config, element config. Let's get rid of that dummy input element here at the top. And with that, we should dynamically create our input elements. Now, as always, I forgot my key. And right now we're not having an onChange handler. We also right now seem to have issues extracting our placeholder. It's an object and not a string. So these are things we have to take care about. Let's start with the key. For the key, I'll simply take form element ID, a property we add in our loop here. Have a typo here. Now regarding the missing onChange handler, for which I also got an error, we'll take care about this in a second. Let's have a look at why we have issues outputting our placeholder though. I found the error. I'm passing the wrong value. It's not the placeholder, the value is wrong. Here, of course, this should be config value, not element config. Now with that, we're outputting the placeholder here. This all is working. Now, of course, we also have to make sure that we can react to changes and that we also have a way of handling our dropdown, because right now this is created incorrectly because, of course, here we have our switch statement in the input component, we handle inputs and text areas, but we also try to create a select element. We do this here in our setup for delivery method should be select with options. So let's add or let's adjust our input component to also be able to create that before we then have a look at how we can actually get the data the user enters.